All right, so second to last speaker today. We're honored to have Christina Noren from, I guess, Christina, you're no longer with CloudBees, right?
I am part-time advising with
You
CloudBees, so they're still the bulk of my time.
Awesome. But absolutely brilliant. I had some incredibly great conversations with Christina in preparation of this talk, talking about ISVs in a multi-cloud world, but talking about the supply chain and actually how software gets delivered across multiple different clouds. And so Christina is a wealth of knowledge. So please, everybody, thank you. Let's welcome Christina to the stage.
Okay. Is there clickers there? Oh, there's a confidence monitor. Cool. Hi, everyone. So a little ahead of schedule, so I don't know if people who intended to attend at 4:10 will walk in midway, but you can all update them. So when I heard about this conference, so I've been familiar with Cockroach Labs since pretty much their beginning. I was introduced to them by some of their early investors and just really was impressed with them 4 years ago and impressed with the progress. So I was excited to hear about the conference and be invited to think about things to talk about. And what I really came upon is that there's a special set of issues that have made life as an independent software vendor or ISV more challenging with the cloud oligopoly, and it's having an impact on how we, and that's usually been my role, is running product at ISVs or board memberships or whatever, that community, how we can serve enterprise customers. And I'm not sure that enterprise buyers are seeing what that new ecosystem, what that impact is on the ISVs that they depend on. So I wanted to sort of show you what's happening inside the sausage factory a little bit, and hopefully that will help you in your strategies for both how you engage with the cloud vendors and how you engage with ISVs. So where I'm coming from with this is I've been in software for 25 years. The most recent 3 involvements, CloudBees, until last month, I was Chief Product Officer. In Irana, I was Chief Product Officer for 2 years, and Honeycomb.io, and Liz Fong-Jones from Honeycomb is speaking tomorrow here at 4 on observability. I'm a board member there. Previous engagements, I've run product. I was founding VP of product at Splunk in 2005 and stayed with the company through its IPO in 2012 as a member of the leadership team. I was head of product at Zuora, the now public billing software company when they were a smaller company in earlier days. So I've been around the industry and I've seen a change. I've seen the rise of cloud and how this has affected us as ISVs. CloudBees, if you don't know it, you probably know or have used Jenkins, and we are traditionally thought, to reference the previous talk, we're traditionally thought of as the enterprise software vendor, the open core vendor behind Jenkins. Well, we do offer Jenkins support and employ more of the core committers of Jenkins than any other company. But we have grown back into a lot of our original vision of creating a separate proprietary product that manages the process of software delivery. And at CloudBees, relative to these cloud vendors, they're a platform for us, they're a channel for us. We work against both their base, legacy VM offerings and their Kubernetes-based offerings. It's a big part of our efforts is to work with cloud vendors. But we are generally selling either SaaS or we're selling self-managed software. Interana has a model. So Interana is a behavioral analytics vendor. It competes with a lot of pure SaaS players that are doing more opinionated analytics. But Interana tends to serve the more high end of the market, like lots of Microsoft accounts, like Salesforce, like a Apple company down in Cupertino or something like that, those kinds of companies. So in that model, typically it's running in the customer's private cloud or public cloud accounts, and Interana is having to have its SREs manage the service, much as what the head of product for Cockroach described in the morning's keynote of the way Cockroach's SREs managed Cockroach clouds. for customers before the public cloud. So it has had its own challenges in dealing with, working through these other cloud vendors. While I was in Irana, that's really when GCP started being on the rise, when our original support was for AWS and for Azure. And at Honeycomb, we're pure SaaS. So we pay the cloud provider bills for what we do. Generally, people don't care which cloud we're in, but that will probably change as the company grows. So CloudBees, as I said, we partner with all three. We have a few dedicated people that do nothing else from a PM and engineering standpoint. And so let me sort of draw my mental picture of the world that we're living in. So, the cloud platforms, it's an oligopoly of three and then a long tail. So the three major ones, but you also end up doing things like we also, are in DigitalOcean's marketplace and VMware's marketplace and so on. But it's these three major ones. There's the ISV ecosystem, and for me, that includes both SaaS and self-managed software vendors, anybody that is creating proprietary or open core software. And by the way, I do disagree with the earlier speaker. I don't think there's businesses to be built on pure support anymore. And I think that to get real innovation, you have to support people actually getting paid for their software. But I do think that the open core model will evolve. Enterprises, hopefully many of you that are customers of both of these. So now let's start talking about the politics going on. So the cloud platforms have very strong will. What they want is they want account control from enterprises, and this whole conference is really about that politics, which is we need the cloud providers, but we all know we live in a bad world if we gave them complete account control. And their methods of doing this are a little different, like GCP being more technical and late to the game. He's trying to co-opt everything by doing, Anthos and basically trying to do the multi-cloud around other people's clouds and hybrid cloud. And, and AWS just likes to make a total, monolith ecosystem. Different ways, and Azure, I used to work Microsoft's just being Microsoft. But when they deal with us in the ISV ecosystem, they are, as many speakers today have already talked about, they're simultaneously competing with us, sometimes pretty above board, and sometimes the asshole behavior that Chris was describing. And they're also gatekeeping because they're trying to become this channel to all of you in the enterprise. And they're making it so much easier to consume things through their billing system, through their marketplaces and so forth, that we'd be as stupid not to play with them as a channel, even though they're also trying to compete with us, as we would be to say, oh no, I don't think we want to work with, IBM Global Services or any SI or any standard, standard bar. And there's just such cutthroat competition within the cloud platforms. And what I would argue is that there is opposition that we don't talk about it as precisely as we should between the earlier slide of what the cloud platforms want and what enterprises, all of you, want from the cloud platforms and from us as ISVs. And what we need, we will not survive and give you value if 100% of our code is open source. Sorry, Chris, we won't. We need access to market, and we need growth, and we need viable business models. And you need transformative innovation that is of a kind, I will argue later in this presentation, is of a kind that you will never get from the cloud vendors themselves. No matter how much acquisition, how many acquisition binges they go on, they're not going to continue to give you innovation in certain areas that are key to your overall strategy. So cloud platforms are, in some ways, this golden opportunity. If you're earlier stage than we are at CloudBees and you're really just getting into the market, just being able to get into these marketplaces and gain access to this market is wonderful. But the marketplaces, I'm not sure that a lot of enterprise users and buyers browsing these marketplaces realize how much search result and featured listing priority is given to marketplace listings from ISVs that have been willing to take a lot of the resources they could have put through to their differentiated innovation and instead done platform-specific integrations. Is there really value to you, the customer, in us as a vendor worrying about how to have our stuff deployed and configured via CloudFormation on AWS and something else on GCP and something else when you run it yourself? Is that really helpful to you? Or is it, the vain attempt of the cloud vendors to get, have one more angle of lock-in? Consolidated billing, well, having worked at Zuora and earlier in my software career at Portal Software, which was the ISP and telco billing solution that Oracle acquired, that is the foundation of Oracle's telco billing, I have an opinion or two about billing. And so the consolidated billing, so in preparation for this talk, I put a feeler out to the product manager at CloudBees who's dealing with all these marketplace listings and getting us to be able to be billed through the marketplaces and so forth. And she sent me, like almost every day, she sent me another diatribe about the pain of making this work. So through a combination of the very limited functionality of the billing systems and the rating systems that these vendors offer, and the way they're trying to control things, and just the rush to market of these platforms where things are just incomplete, it's just a maze. So you can't price and list and enable support and access to entitlements the same way for Google Anthos marketplace listings as for traditional GCP marketplace listings. You can't offer the same pricing models for Kubernetes listings in AWS as for non-Kubernetes listings. There's just a maze of this stuff. The documentation's inaccurate, and then pricing model-wise. And this gets a little bit into what the cloud vendors are good at and what they're just have blind spots on. They really want to push all of us ISVs to list on consumption-based models, so it's really just a surcharge on the technical resources. If you want to know what I think about pricing, there's a long talk that I gave a couple years ago on pricing strategies for ISVs that's pretty Googleable, but it's usually a really poor way of pricing anything where the real value to the user is not tied to the amount of compute or the amount of resource. They also, some of them are trying to steer the ISVs and their listings away from annual or monthly subscriptions and instead to pure usage-based. That might be good. It might be good for the customer in a particular product. It might be good for the ISV to offer that, but it's not good for all categories of software. So for what we offer, for continuous integration, that's a workload-heavy thing. We charge for our commercial products on a per-user basis, but we can kind of grant that, hey, it probably does make sense for that piece of our portfolio to be a usage-based thing, and we're happy to experiment with that on the marketplace listings. But as you get into things that are more of an enterprise software system, where our value proposition is managing the process of software development, our value is not tied to compute cycles, and the flexibility is not there to list properly. So I could go on, and I know Jen, that product manager, would love me to go on this point, but I promised I'd give that some effort. But I think the impact to you as the enterprise buyer is that you're losing the ability to influence the ISVs to price in the way that serves you as a buyer and price in a way that makes their businesses sustainable. Actually, the last point I want to make, how many of you are familiar with, on various platforms, whether it's in cloud marketplaces or in consumer things like I use 1stDibs a lot, which is a way of buying collectible stuff online. And there's the ability to make a private offer. People know private offers? So private offer would be, we've got these standard tiles in the marketplace. And by the way, most of the vendors are limiting us to 3 or 5 different packages, which is not as granular as the range of sizes of things that we usually offer. On 1stDibs, a dealer of a piece of furniture can make me an offer for 5 times the number of pieces that was listed and make me a deal and make up something that's suitable. In an enterprise software context, we might want to make you a very specific offer. It's a normal thing in enterprise software negotiation. The only private offers that the cloud platforms allow are discounts off the standard offers. So again, they're really limiting that flexibility. Now, you all as enterprise software buyers, the larger companies you work for, you have the power to push back and say, hey, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, you want us to buy our enterprise software through you? We have to have the ability to negotiate a good price on a custom offer through your platforms, and then we will bill through your platforms, and you'll be happy, and your salespeople will be happy. But that has to come from you. It can't come from us. So this platform-specific work has major opportunity cost. The platform-specific integrations obstruct your enterprise multi-cloud strategies in very insidious ways. And then the major, really warring technology initiatives just throw everything off. So I can go to 5 big customer meetings, and I can go to one that's all in on Kubernetes, and I can go to one that's really in bed with AWS and has been convinced that everything has to be Fargate. And am I going to support both strategies for getting to ephemeral execution of CI within our portfolio? So the cloud platforms, as has been noted before, are an existential threat to some ISVs. And I think the categories matter. Commercial open source. I do think Chris is right in that where you have a community, and Jenkins is this way in some ways as well, where you have a community where there's kind of a, there's a pressure to make all the features be part of the open source. And then you're trying to make money as a vendor by keeping some proprietary. I don't think that's sustainable, like in that traditional open core model. And there will be pressure, the community will just build, and one of these cloud vendors will pick up something where 80% of the features are in the community. They'll do the last 20% overlap with you, and do you what AWS did to Elastic. I think developer-adopted community tools and infrastructure is really hard to compete with offers that come through the marketplaces. I think developers just want to click their way through to get things going quickly. And as has been noted by a few speakers, they'll do that in whatever clouds you give them access to, and maybe you can get some governance around it, but that's where the fundamental choices are going to get made. And then, I think I've spent a lot of my life in the data side. I think a lot of generic data services, it's harder to make a database company that's not an open source company that doesn't end up having your open source thing be offered by the cloud vendors with no revenue to you. I think there's 2 places for ISVs to play. So I think ISVs are ready to solve bigger business problems. And by what I mean there is anything. So I've also talked recently about the classes of problems that the open source development model works well on, and the classes where Agile and DevOps work well on, and I've actually come to believe they're opposed models. They're both great, but they're not the same thing. And to build true enterprise applications, a billing system like Zuora, a CRM system like Salesforce, or I would argue what we're now doing at CloudBees, a software delivery management system that has interfaces for management, for developers, for product managers, for designers, all these different personas, and supports really advanced business processes. The sort of decentralized developer is both, user and developer model that comes in open source that I think is also the model within the type of engineering culture you have inside of the cloud vendors. I don't think the cloud vendors are going to give that to you. I don't think you're going to suddenly have, AWS build a better CRM than Salesforce. And so I would argue that these three companies I've been involved with in previous years are in that category. And then I think a whole point of why Cockroach is throwing a multi-cloud conference, and I think this applies to CloudBees as well, is that ISVs are the way you can have consistent mission-critical technology across different clouds. So even things that may be developer-led in their initial adoption, like a database or a CI server, if you start to have some governance about what technologies you bring into the environment, pushing those choices towards not being things that drive cloud platform lock-in. But it's a trickier thing because you don't want to make developers feel like they've been disempowered from making expedient choices early in projects. Okay, this one's an eye chart, sorry. I had 3 rows on this, and our chief strategy officer, who's French and intellectual, made me add another row. It's always what happens. So I think I'm glad to hear that people are a little bit more nuanced at this conference than I usually hear about what are the different delivery models out there, because you still hear on-prem versus SaaS out there in the world as kind of like these are the only 2 things. And I think they mix some dimensions. And I think that an enterprise's portfolio of tools and services and applications and infrastructure is going to end up being a mix of different pieces with different cells in this diagram, which I'll try to walk through in a minute. So I think we conflate, when we say on-premise versus SaaS, we conflate who manages it versus where it runs. So it can, on-premise does not mean private cloud and servers in my data center. It just means servers in my data center. Hybrid cloud plus on-premises means, I'm running across public cloud vendors, maybe multiple public cloud vendors, and some of what's running may be running on my physical servers. That's a lot of what Anthos, that Google's offering, is enabling right now. It could run in the customer's own cloud account. It can run in a hybrid situation. So a service such as what we saw demoed from Cockroach this morning is Cockroach Cloud. Clearly, they've got some servers running the basic framing infrastructure of, okay, I'm managing all of my Cockroach instances and so forth, but then they're asking you to spin up in something where you're going to get the bill from that cloud vendor. In our space, there's a European company called BuildKite that does CI this way. So they've got a sort of SaaS front-end thing, but then you pointed it at your cloud account for execution. Effectively, that's what why people like Interana's model that are larger, because Salesforce.com gets a lot better pricing from Amazon than Amplitude does, which would be a true SaaS alternative to Interana. So they'd rather just pay Interana for the software and the management, but not, pay a markup to Interana's more exorbitant rates on the cloud providers. So then, vendor cloud account, but single tenant versus vendor cloud account multi-tenant. Sometimes as a buyer of software, you're not always quite aware unless it's something that's really so mission critical that you're really looking at the security policy. An interesting thing about the rise of Kubernetes and what Google's doing with Anthos is it may make multi-tenant SaaS obsolete, because it may be so easy to make the model of delivering a SaaS that every time you spin up a customer account, you're just spinning up behind the scenes, a new Kubernetes cluster. So even if you're paying for it and you're a SaaS vendor, the multi-tenant architectures of earlier SaaS generations like Zendesk and Salesforce and Zuora might actually become obsolete. So that's the columns, and then the rows, again, who's on call, right? And who's doing all of the deployment, upgrade, management, et cetera. So the traditional on-premise model is the customer does it, but for years there have been models where ISVs will manage it for you, like apparently Cockroach originally did with its SREs managing Cockroach Cloud for you. And MSPs have always managed service providers, often separate businesses from VARs out there, have often made a nice business of managing complex software for customers, and that's always an option. Cloud platforms, a lot of what's happening with the with the marketplace listings is just all of the management of a service deployed in the customer cloud account is just handled by the cloud vendor. So there's a mix of these models, and the considerations, and I would encourage you to, I would encourage teams within enterprises to get this full matrix of possibilities, get more people who are making technology choices within their organizations to understand this matrix, and then have some model for deciding what's the preferred model for a given service or technology. So, the factors are going to be cost. You may have better pricing than what's behind the scenes on the SaaS pricing model. But the opposite may be true if you're a mid-size enterprise and you're buying from a massive SaaS vendor. The opposite may be true. Convenience, do you have to go through purchasing? Elasticity, is the model going to scale on demand? Do you trust that scaling model? We've talked a lot about sort of the security and compliance aspects of geographic regions and certification specific to your industry. Strategy, this is my Walmart point. So, are you in Walmart's vendor ecosystem, or are you Walmart that doesn't want to buy from AWS? And there's going to be more and more of those rivalries with consolidation. And then, just lock in. So, pure SaaS plays may lock up your data too much as well. So, I think we're at last slide here. Is Jim still there? How are we doing on time? Good. So, takeaways, and I'm happy to take some questions. So, my biggest ask here, I don't know if this talk has enlightened you about what it's like on the ISV side. When I sit in roadmap meetings with you, and some of you know that I hate the word roadmap, but if I sit in roadmap meetings with you and you're thinking that there's not enough coming from whomever I'm representing, behind the scenes, these cloud platforms are sucking my development resource away with stuff that's not adding value for you. So please use your buying power to make the cloud platforms play nicer with the ISVs that you depend on. When you're browsing stuff, or anybody in your organization that's allowed to go browse the marketplaces and add technologies, recognize that it may be biased. And when should you go to cloud vendors versus ISVs? Look to us for key technologies that need to run consistently across multiple clouds to help your multi-cloud strategy, and more sophisticated enterprise applications. And then just understand that the world's not as simple as SaaS or on-prem, and there's a lot more sophistication. And when you're making asks of different form factors from us, really think about what you're asking. We want to know on the two-dimension chart, how do you want to consume what we have to offer? Okay.
All right, so Christina, that last slide. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, is it curious? Yeah, so that last slide. I'm pretty certain that there's no conference on the planet that would have allowed you to have that.
Yeah, that's why I was excited to fly out here for that one.
Exactly. So, but we do have some time. So, are there any questions? I mean,
you've been on the ISV side of this world, so I think either one of us could answer a lot of questions on this.
I think I saw a couple people on my team saying, if you have a database, it's really difficult to keep it private or to protect it. So.
Yeah.
Any insights, not from the enterprise level, but from startup level? Are there any sort of insights from the enterprise level that I could use as a startup in negotiating that first SLA with a major vendor?
With the cloud vendors?
Yeah, not having the same leverage that Salesforce has.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just have to either decide that the value you're offering, you can do the markup, and that SaaS is the right consumption model. But I think the biggest advice is, are your choices of coming to market, do you really have to offer a pure SaaS where you take the cloud bill, or are you offering something where the better consumption model is something like Interana's or Build Kites or or cockroaches? Is that a better thing, depending? And that gets down to how much is it towards like low compute, low storage cost, and and more sort of logic value, if you will, versus
Intangible value.
Yeah, exactly. Versus a wrapper on computer data.
Okay, thank you.
Christina, if I could add, we actually partnered with a company called Tackle.io. They're going to be here tomorrow talking about this, and these guys have been through every single cloud provider, and they basically broker your negotiation, your interaction with the cloud providers from a marketplace point of view.
I didn't know that.
It's super complex to navigate. I mean, we as a team have been going through this, and it's just really rough. We're good at building software and selling, but then we have to actually navigate this whole thing. So there's companies out there that do have a little bit of a sense of what that is, but I can't stress enough how much the maintain your own price and your own pricing schedule, because I hate to be beholden to their pricing schedule, because that's how they make money. And that's not, pricing to me is a value conversation, right? Because you're paying for what we have. And so making sure that price is going to map to the value of what you provide, I always feel is one of the most important things.
Well, that
through
is the
process.
Walmartization right there, because all kinds of consumer goods categories have lost their ability to be anything but commodity through
Right.
Walmart, and it's robbed the consumer and society of a lot of value by chasing the low price.
Amen. I mean, I can't agree more. So.
But then also, like, the interesting thing for me, just again coming from that billing background, I mean, so one of the quips that our, a couple of people back at the CloudBees had to say about this talk was, just, can't AWS and GCP respectively buy Azure and Recurly so they could actually get good at this billing they're trying to do? And it's true, because part of the frustration with this pricing is because they're trying to be in control and it's intentional, and part of it is frankly just incompetence. I couldn't say that at any of their conferences, could I?
No, that's also something never said at definitely both of those, all those conferences. So. Any other questions? Great.
Hi. Wow, that's loud. I'm back here. One of the big risks that at a large company we're always worried about when buying from a small company is, like, if this marketplace is so cutthroat, and if the cloud providers are trying to squeeze the life out of everything, how do we prevent that kind of death spiral of, oh, they're not going to be around for very long, and so we may as well not buy from them?
Well, I think it comes down to, in some ways, you end up being like a venture capitalist deciding whether to invest in one of our companies, right? So you have to decide, is the thing they're doing and their go-to-market and business model for doing it something that can survive in this market? And that's part of the guidelines I've tried to provide in this presentation. So, if they are an earnest but naive, small, purely technical team, very enthusiastic about bringing their open core thing to market and putting it out there under permissive license, and they don't have a lot of answers, I think they have a great risk of just being undercut by being swindled by either the cloud providers or, and I won't name names, or a rising class of rather predatory, overfunded, larger ISVs that are making it their business to go category kill. And if it's a team that seems very savvy about these things and is, if they're negotiating more strongly with you for value and you understand that their value is either those two things, either it's a more complex business application that's harder to just grab the open source and like maintain it if there's not really, collaborative product development involving design and product management and so forth, and it's not a static point in time, but you're really relying on that ongoing dialogue between you as the customer and the product team at the vendor, and that's what you and others like you are going to pay for, they'll survive if they do it well. Or if they are offering something where the value prop to you and other customers is very much that multi-cloud strategy, and they can deliver on that, they can sell it, and it's basically immune to that kind of thing, but you have to look for that. And unfortunately, a lot of great, innovative, technical teams won't be able to escape that first category.
Time for one more if we have any more. All right.
Okay.
Christina, that was awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.
You with me? You good?